The U.S., as well as Ukraine, Germany, France, and the U.K. are expected to hold negotiations tomorrow in Geneva on President Trump's new plan to end Russia's war on Ukraine. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff are expected to attend. The Trump administration says it will hold separate talks with Russia. Ukrainian President Zelensky says the latest U.S. plan forces him to choose between his country's sovereignty and keeping U.S. support. Let's bring in Kurt Volker, former U.S. ambassador to NATO. Ambassador Volker, you probably have access to more of the details on what this proposal is than the rest of us. What do you think of it?
Well, I think it is incredibly one-sided. It puts all the restrictions on Ukraine and none on Russia. And that's very strange because it is Russia that has attacked Ukraine. We are calling in this agreement for Ukraine to withdraw from some Ukrainian territory rather than calling on Russia to withdraw from Ukrainian territory. So there are a lot of things that are off about this. I think it's very good that the US, UK, France, Germany, and Ukraine are all meeting in Geneva to talk about this. I'm reminded of the minerals deal where the first draft of that was also just a terrible document, but it was improved through negotiations. And let's hope that a similar process takes place here.
The Russians invaded Crimea in the Obama administration. They didn't get much of a response from the West. Then they invade, mainland, the major part of Ukraine in the Biden administration. They still have a good chunk of the eastern part of that country. Should they be rewarded and allowed to keep it?
No, absolutely not. And one of the confusing things about this U.S. draft peace agreement is that it confuses the idea of de facto Russian control versus recognition. It literally says would be recognized as de facto Russia, which is a non sequitur. You don't really know what that means. Russia, none of the occupied territories should be recognized as Russian. They are by law, by recognition, by Russia's own past diplomatic recognition, all part of Ukraine, and we should not be legitimizing any gains for aggression like that. Similarly, Russia has committed heinous war crimes in Ukraine, abducting children, murdering civilians, targeting civilians deliberately with drones or with missiles. These things need to be held to account, and just whitewashing that, as this agreement would do, would set a very bad precedent for future conflicts.
Yeah, I've read that Russia is kind of hanging on by a thread. Their economy is in shambles. The sanctions have had a real bite. They've lost maybe 1 million soldiers trying to take Ukraine. And we're about, to enter the winter fighting season, which is really the worst for both sides. Is it possible that if Ukraine could hang on for another 6 months, that the Russians would just have to give up, turn tail, and leave?
Well, it's certainly possible. At a minimum, I think we can get Putin to a point where he sees an interest in a ceasefire in place. What this agreement that the U.S. has proposed would do is give Russia more territory and many advantages, limiting Ukraine's sovereignty in the future. So that is really a non-starter. But if we can add to those woes that Putin has, financially, economically, militarily, then he may want to get a ceasefire in the not too distant future, and we should be jumping on that just to stop the war where it is, rather than creating all of these unnecessary guarantees for Russia.
The Germans invaded France in World War II, and the United States never said, yeah, you can go ahead and hang on to France. We kicked them out. Why not do that again? I mean, obviously, U.S. troops are not involved here, but U.S. weapons certainly are.
Right. Well, certainly, I think every U.S. president that has dealt with it, Obama, Biden, and Trump, they have not wanted to get U.S. military forces involved directly in fighting Russia. And that's partly because it could lead to escalation to nuclear weapons. So they're all cautious about that. But as you say, there is no reason to hold back, as the Biden administration did and as now the Trump administration is doing. No reason to hold back in giving Ukraine the weapons that it needs to defend itself, especially if they're being paid for by our European allies. So there's a lot more that could be on the table with the weaponry for Ukraine. They've also developed their own long-range drones and long-range missiles and are themselves able to take out military targets deep inside Russia. We should be facilitating that in order to get Putin to want to have a ceasefire.
The G20 leaders issued a statement regarding the president's peace plan. Here's part of it. We are clear on the principle that borders must not be changed by force. We are also concerned by the proposed limitations on Ukraine's armed forces, which would leave Ukraine vulnerable to future attack. Well, that's what the Russians have done here, is tried to change the border.
That's exactly right. And that's what they claim to have done by having votes in their parliament to say that they have now annexed these 5 provinces that are part of Ukraine. No one else in the world recognizes that, nor should they. Just as that G20 statement says, taking other countries' territory by force is unacceptable. It sets a terrible precedent for future war.
Real quickly, I want to put up the key points to the president's Ukraine-Russia peace plan. One of them says Ukraine would receive reliable security guarantees. Well, if you give Russia a big chunk of Ukraine right now, what's to prevent them from taking another chunk down the road?
That's right. And why would Ukraine believe in any of these security guarantees if the countries that are going to offer those guarantees are signing away Ukrainian territory as we speak? You also have to remember there is something called the Budapest Memorandum, signed in the mid-90s, where Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees from the United States, the UK, France, and Russia. Well, Russia flagrantly violated that by attacking Ukraine, and we did nothing. UK did nothing. France did nothing. So you can see why the Ukrainians don't really believe that security guarantees short of NATO membership are actually going to be followed through on. They're very, very skeptical for good reason.
Ambassador Kurt Volker, it's good to have your insights. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, John.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.